I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I am speaking with Desi Lydic, the one of the correspondents and occasional host of a little show called The Daily Show on Comedy Central. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, in the past couple of months, you've gotten to step into the anchor desk at The Daily Show, which I imagine must be something amazing to do. What's it been like to sit behind the anchor desk there?
It is wild. It's completely wild. I watched The Daily Show for many, many years. I was a huge fan before actually getting the chance to be a correspondent on the show. And my dream job was to be a correspondent on the show. I auditioned for the show multiple times over the years, and never did I think in a million years that I get the chance to sit at the desk. But here we are, and it's really, really thrilling. The way that I describe it is it's kind of like being a passenger on a flight and being asked to jump into the cockpit and take the controls, but you're kind of like building the plane in the air as you're flying.
I think I've had nightmares like that.
Yeah, I think that's how Boeing does it now, actually. They've just succumbed to building it after takeoff. So it's sort of like that.
Why we're Team Airbus all the way. Um,
Same.
so, I mean, you started like right when Trevor Noah was starting in 2015, and the show. Of course, Trevor left the show to do other things, and you got quite a bit of a shakeup with Jon Stewart coming back and doing one show a week. And I'm wondering what has that been like having him back as being a part of the show?
Well, I think, he's a fresh new face, but he shows potential. I think he's got a skill set, and I think he'll get there. He'll get there. He'll come around. No, he's Jon Stewart. He's like, the greatest of all time. He's the guy who invented really this style comedy, and he's the reason why I so desperately wanted to be a correspondent on the show. So having him back is incredible. I mean, as even just a fan of the show and coming into such an important election, I think I'm someone who wants to know, like the rest of America, what does he think? What's his take on what's happening? Help us feel better about what's happening. Help us laugh about, how things feel so polarized right now. So as a fan, I am thrilled that he's back at the show and doing Monday nights. And then as someone who gets to take the desk every now and again, I could not ask for a better mentor or a better master class in how it's done. It's an incredible gift.
And I think you were talking about this with Stephen Colbert last night. You were talking about how really such a centerpiece of the show are the field pieces that you guys, the correspondents, do. That's been a staple of the show since it started in the late 90s. And I'm curious, of all the field pieces that you've done, which one is your personal favorite, where you look back at that one and you go, I'm really proud of that one?
Oh, there are two that come to mind. My favorite field piece, just creatively, because it was stylistically a little different, and we just had the greatest characters and just a fascinating through line, was called Florida Man. And that was just like, we were sort of satirizing a detective show. So I was trying to uncover who is Florida Man, as though it's like one being. But what we ended up uncovering was finding out about the Sunshine State law, which makes, anytime that there's a Florida man, you can publicize it. So we just hear more about Florida men than we hear about other states. So technically there's a little bit of Florida man in every man. And that was kind of like the final beat of the piece. Creatively, that was one of my favorites. We just had great Florida characters in that. But the one that's probably closest to my heart would be one that I shot in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from, at the NRA convention. And we could not get press credentials to go into the NRA convention. We were not allowed to carry our cameras inside the building, but you could carry firearms. So that was the Daily Show hypocrisy that we played with within the piece. So every interview was happening outside of the convention, and we had multiple conversations with people out and about. But the most meaningful one was with my dad. So my dad came with me on that shoot that day, and my dad is a pretty conservative Republican, and we're on totally different sides of things in terms of our politics. But we were able to have a brief but a meaningful conversation about actually really at the heart of it wanting the same thing in terms of common sense gun reform. And so when things feel so polarized and it feels like we'll never come together on anything, it was just like a very small kind of glimmer of hope. So I love the piece for that reason.
That actually brings, I was, because I know you've done a couple pieces about your home state of Kentucky, and especially not just as a correspondent, but as anchor as well. And I was wondering if you could explain how you came to do those pieces about Kentucky and what doing those pieces meant to you.
Oh, thanks for asking about that. Yeah, I mostly wanted a free trip to go home and visit my family. So I tricked Comedy Central into paying for it for me to attend a family reunion. That was number one. No, I find Kentucky politics to be fascinating and somewhat representative of many states in our country, where you have a good part of the population that actually wants certain policies, and the legislators aren't necessarily representing what most of the population actually wants. And, you know, I think Kentucky gets kind of a bad reputation with Mitch McConnell and all kinds of like really regressive gun laws and reproductive health rights and all of that. So I wanted to do something there where we could have just a slightly more nuanced conversation with people who are trying to change things there in Louisville specifically. So that one, I really wanted to be able to try to do a local piece for that week of hosting. And yeah, it felt really good to do that. I think that there are a million states that, you know, many places that we could go to where we could have similar conversations, but Kentucky was just personal to me.
So, you know, as I said, you started in 2015 in the before times in the way long ago.
Yeah.
Over your time at the Daily Show, you must have, you know, covered and satirized so many events. But what I'm really curious about is what event has been the most surreal for you to cover and make jokes about, because it feels like everything over the last 10 years has just been one thing after another.
Well, I mean, going way back, election night in when Trump won the election, I think like none of us saw it coming except Trevor. Trevor saw it coming.
Were you working? Were you doing a live show that night?
We're doing a live show, and we had 3 different pieces prepared based on who was going to win. And I think if Hillary won, I was going to be on that night. And if it was too early to tell, Michelle Wolf was going to be on. She had a piece. And if Trump won, I forget who, maybe Roy was going to be on. And so we were all kind of waiting in the wings. And I was about to go shoot a quick turnaround for that night at the Javits Center to be there as the balloons fell and the champagne was going to be popped for Hillary. We were so sure. And then once we started to see it turn, when I saw Michelle in the makeup chair, I was like, oh my God, oh no. And they canceled our shoot to go to the Javits. And that was truly the most surreal night that changed everything. Obviously, after that, you just can't be surprised. But I mean, even just the last week of news stories has been nuts. You've got RFK brainworm. You have the Stormy Daniels trial. I mean, what kind of madness are we living in right now?
Oh God, some reason that RFK brainworm thing just felt like the most of all the stories. It felt like the most normal of all of them.
You're like, oh, this, okay. No, this tracks. This feels, yeah, it's things are wild politically when that is the normal story in the news.
We were talking about, how everything can feel so hectic right now, and especially for you and for the people who work on the show, I can only imagine how it must feel because you know you're covering this, you're doing this stuff, you're trying to make jokes about it, but it's also so immediate and can feel so uh 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 uh, uh, drastic, I think. We saw how John those last few years, how he was really burning out of that,
Yeah.
and I'm curious as to how have you managed to, keep going this long on the show without burning out, given the state of everything in American politics.
Well, I feel it is, it is, it can be a lot to pay that close attention to the news all the time. I think you really do have to force yourself to unplug every now and again. So when we do have hiatuses, I really try to step back and not pay attention and give myself a mental break for a bit. And that certainly helps. But I'm coming up on 9 years at the show. And when I think about it, we've had so many different evolutions of the show. When I started, Trevor was brand new and Trevor had a new vision for the show. And so it was evolving, around his voice and his point of view, and also some really cool creative changes that he wanted to make to the field department. So we were experimenting with all kinds of things in the beginning, and then then there was the pandemic, which was obviously an awful, very challenging time in the world. But for us to be able to talk about what was happening in a comedic way and find the humor in things during that time, it was so cathartic and really felt like therapy for us. Not to mention just creatively having to figure out how to shoot a show from our apartments, and what that was like. So it was incredibly challenging, but creatively fulfilling to try to do something different. And then we came back, and and then Trevor announced that he was leaving, and so for a period of time, some of us got to guest host, and then we had all these awesome comedians come through and get to host the show, and that was really creatively challenging. And now having John come back as our fearless leader again. Dad went out for cigarettes, but he did come back. So I think there was this like, oh my God, now we have John and we get to hear what he has to say about all of this. So having him as a boss and as a mentor and as a master class and how this is done, in addition to being given time for us to host, it's such a gift, and I can't think of another job on the planet creatively in this world where I would be able to try out so many different things. So it continues to evolve creatively, and that's exciting for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I love talking to people who work in comedy because it's always interesting to hear who has influenced them and inspired them to get into that field. And so I'm curious for you, who have been some of the biggest influences and inspirations in your comedic career?
Mostly whoever's on Fox News that day. They're most of the inspiration.
Jesse Waters is the gift that keeps on giving.
Jesse, Tucker, God rest his
Brian
soul.
Kilmeade.
Oh God, you got all the greats. The Five, you got the Deuce. I mean, it's just an endless
You
well.
scared. You got Pete also, who reports from the White House.
That's right. That's right. Squared. Yeah, no, there are a lot of comedic inspiration. Well, that's my inspo for Fox Plains, probably. That I would say them for that. I was a huge avid watcher of SNL in the 90s and the early 2000s, like those years when the women were really, really dominating. Anna Gasteyer and Rachel Dratch and Maya and Amy and Tina and all of those women have been such an influence because they weren't just performers, but also writing their own material. And they were just so bold and unapologetic and so funny. Um, and when I was younger, my dad would show me reruns of the Carol Burnett show. So Carol Burnett is, I mean, no one can touch her as far as I'm concerned. She's just the greatest. And when I think about the time that her show was on, and that she was, at her, when the Carol Burnett show came out, it was such a male dominated field, to have that slot at CBS, and she just changed the whole landscape. Yeah, she's definitely an icon for me.
Well, Desi, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best over the next couple of months. And to all of our viewers, please like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and make your Emmy predictions in advance of the nominations in July. Thanks so much, Desi.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.